from Scuderia Audio, and today I have a new cool product to show you, but before that I owe you guys an apology. Now if you're watching this video, odds are you've already seen my first stealth amp shelf harness system for the 458, 488, F8, Aperta, Pista, Speciale, all the derivations. If you haven't seen that video, the Cliff Notes version is, in the past, everybody would mount their aftermarket car stereo amplifier in the front trunk, which meant drilling holes, taking the tub out, trying to get access through the firewall, running tons of wires halfway through the car. It was a real nightmare. But I came up with this system where I manufacture these AutoCAD design laser cut shelves that you mount right above the car battery under the passenger footwell. And you mount a high-end Moscone amplifier with a digital signal processor built in. You mount this right above the battery. It takes like 15 minutes to install, and the coolest thing is that the two objects that this amplifier has to interface with, which is the car battery and the source, which in this case is the infotainment system or the NIT, well, the batteries, once you have this in place, the battery is like, what, 3 inches away? And the NIT is like 5 inches away. So you can run nice, clean, tight wiring harnesses to this amplifier. I also explained that on the Speciale and the Pista, the connectors that NIT uses, you can get those connectors on the open market. So I manufacture this custom harness that you can plug into the NIT, then you plug your car's harness into the other side, and I separate out the speaker wires. And the rest of the harness I sell as part of this package. You just run a cable from this small X connector to the input side of the amp, and then another connector from the output side of the amp to this connector, right? Then you run a power wire to the battery, a ground wire to the chassis, and an amp turn-on wire to the fuse box. And now you were able to have a complete 100% plug-and-play solution without cutting a single wire in your harness. Then I had mentioned that if you want to install the system in a 458, 488, or F8, where the connectors are restricted products and you cannot buy those on the open market, then unfortunately you had to cut the wires in the harness, and I provided a mini harness that allows you to do that. So, I got a few sales for the mini harness ones where you had to cut the wires, but I was getting inundated with sales, especially from the dealerships, for the Pistas and the Speciales, because as soon as they found out you could install a stereo without cutting any wires, everybody just went bonkers. So the apology part comes when I discovered that some of these connectors that are supposedly restricted products, according to the Tyco Electronics rep, which is the OEMer for these connectors, when they told me to my face that the connectors were not available because they were restricted products, I kind of sort of gave up. But with the help of some very intelligent friends, we were able to source some connectors that did connect up with some of the amplifiers in some of these other cars, right? Now, the 458 with the bass stereo option has no amplifier, and as of today, May of 2022, we haven't come up with a connector to plug into that infotainment box, but we're close. But the 458 with the JBL option, we found some connectors that will plug into that amplifier. Here's an amp, I bought it used, out of a JBL, out of a 458 with the JBL option. This is the JBL amp. This plug here, you can get connectors. It's extremely difficult, but you can get connectors that'll fit this plug, right? I mean, some of these places that I found is like I have to get someone that can read Hebrew in order to figure out how I can acquire some of these connectors. But I managed to acquire some of these connectors, and now I'm able to construct a custom harness where you can bypass the stock amplifier completely and use the high-end Moscone digital signal processor amp instead. Same thing with the 488. Now, the 488 has an amplifier with the bass system, and it has an amplifier with the JBL enhanced system. Here's an amplifier out of a 488 with the bass system, because both those systems have an amp. Well, you'll notice that the plug is exactly the same. In fact, there's several cars in the Ferrari line that share this same plug. They're all similar 8-channel amps. For example, the Lusso without the JBL option has this amp. The California T without the JBL option has this amp. And the FF without the JBL option also has this amp. So this harness will work for all of those cars. Now, the 488 with the JBL option has a larger 12-channel amp, which doesn't have just one connector, it has several connectors. We're still working on sourcing some connectors that will work with those amps. Same thing with the F8. Whether you have the bass system or the JBL system, it's a 12-channel amp and it doesn't have this connector. But I'm not going to make the same mistake I did before and say it's going to be impossible to interface to, because now that we've come up with this, now I have hope that I'm eventually going to be able to source some connectors that'll work with those cars. But for now, this harness will allow you to bypass the amplifier on any 458 with the JBL option, 488 without the JBL option, Lusso, FF, or California T without the JBL option, where you just bypass this amplifier. In other words, you take your car's harness that plugs into this amp, you unplug it, you plug it right into this custom harness, then you take the 3 plugs on the other end, you plug those 3 into this amp, right? The input, the output, and the power, ground, and turn on. And then this separate wire here goes to, it'll send like over 200 watts of power to a big monster subwoofer if you ever want to put one of those in the car. Now, with the Speciale and Pista connector, you didn't have to cut any wires, but you still have to run a power wire to the ground, a power wire to the battery, a ground wire to the ground, and an amp turn-on wire to the fuse box. But this harness does everything. This harness has the power wire, the ground, the amp turn-on, and everything included. So all you do is just plug in these 4 plugs, plug in the subwoofer, and you're off to the races. So, I have my portable system all set up at my dining room table. So we're going to go out there. What we're going to do is we're going to hook up my portable system with a test harness that I created. Then we're going to plug that test system into both of these amps. That proves that the system I have out there is basically a simulated Ferrari. Then we're going to take that harness and unplug it from these amps and plug it into the Moscone amp and show how it still works, only a lot better. Okay, well, let's go play with the stereo. Okay, so I have a lot to demonstrate, but I want to get it in one fluid shot to show that there's no trickery or anything like that. So forgive me if I stumble or make a mistake or two. Okay, here we go. I have my good old portable system with the Focal component speakers and these little bookshelf boxes. I have a subwoofer from an Italia. It's turned around right now, but we'll get back to that later. I have some Morel ultra thin 6.5-inch carbon fiber drivers. Those things are awesome. Those are the rear speakers for our simulated system. Then I have a good old cheapy head unit with a thumb drive. power supply, and then I bought an amp used from a 488 without the JBL option, and I also bought an amp out of the 458 Italia with the JBL option. Now you'll notice that both of these amps have the exact same receptacle. It's just one big Molex plug. Just like, you know, remember the 360s and the 430s, they have the booster. It's just one giant proprietary Molex plug. So the harness that I'm manufacturing and selling has the exact same plug as these amps, right? The Luso without the JBL option, the FF without the JBL option, the California T without the JBL option have similar amps with this same plug, so this harness will work with all those cars. Now on the other end, the corresponding plug is this plug. This is the plug, the exact same plug that's on your harness that plugs into your amp, right? So I built this little test harness for my end, and I'm going to hook it up and prove to you that between this harness and this gear, I basically have a simulated Ferrari car stereo that's similar in every way. Okay, so we're going to hook it up. We'll start with 488 amp first. We'll plug him in, lock him down. Then we have the amp power ground and turn on. Those will go into my 12 volt power supply. Then we have the 4 speakers, so there's 8 speaker wires. We're going to plug those into the head unit. And then this other side is for, you know, the head unit power, ground, and amp turn on. So plug him in. So now the sound is coming out the head unit, through these wires, through these wires, through this harness into the amp. So all that's left is the wires coming out of the amp that go to the speakers. So I have these two that are for the front speakers. We'll plug them in. And then I have these wires going to the simulated rear speakers. We'll plug those guys in. Let's see. Plug in the power supply. Wait a few seconds for the capacitors to get charged up in the amp. Remember, you won't have this problem because with your system, you always have power and ground going to the amp. It's just the remote turn-on wire gets energized when you turn on your radio. So we'll put in our thumb drive with our good old Scuderia audio theme song. I can't play a song that you can recognize because YouTube will shut the video down. So put in here. And we have sound coming out of all 4 speakers. Okay, unplug the power supply. Unplug the 488. There's a little tab that you have to press. Then you can remove the lever and this pops right out. Now, we'll plug in the Italia amp with the JBL option. Push it in, lock him down, turn on the power supply. Wait a couple seconds. A little bit of routing. It's a little bit more power for the JBL. Now, obviously, there's no subwoofer output. There's not much we can do for the subwoofer. But this is to show you that this setup is a simulated Ferrari. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to show how to use this harness to hook up the Moscone amplifier that mounts right above your battery with a digital signal processor built in. So I have a custom tune file that I spent a couple of hours with their software configuring a nice tune file that'll work in these cars. It's already pre-programmed into this unit. But of course, this will all work even if you don't have a custom tune file. It'll work straight out of the box. But man, I mean, this is why you buy a digital signal processor amp, so you can tune the sound in your car to perfection. So I was kidding around with my buddies how this was so simple that you could basically hook it up blindfolded and they're all, do it, do it. So it's like, all right, I'll accept that challenge. Let's give it a shot. Okay. Here's the harness. I'm going to disconnect. Remember, push that thing down. You can get the lever out. Disconnect the Italia. The big connectors and the little connectors. All right. Push that in. Lock him in. Then we have what? This is the speaker output. Right, the hardest part is going to be getting the Molex plugged in correctly. This is the power and ground. The last one is the speaker inputs. Goes on the other side. And that's it. Oh, one more thing. Where is it? Where is it? See, this has an extra cable that I have coming out of my harness that sends a lot of power to a subwoofer should you decide to put one in your car. I have too much fun with this stuff, and that's it. So all we have to do, my head unit took a dive. So all we have to do, again, is plug the power supply in, wait a few seconds for the capacitors in this amp to charge up. Remember, you won't have that problem with your car because you'll always have power and ground going to this Moscone amp. Put in our Scuderia audio theme song. I mean, the whole table is shaking. This subwoofer is pounding. Of course, the music quality is going to suck because it's a YouTube video, but just trust me, it sounds incredible. All 4 speakers are firing, and you've got 230 watts going to the sub. And that's about it. Okay, well, that's about it. Now remember, if you have the 458 with the bass system, the 488 with the JBL system, or an F8, and you don't want to wait, you can still hook up this system. You just have to only cut the speaker wires on the harness and install this little mini connector. If you watched the previous Stealth Amp Shelf video, you know exactly what I'm talking about, but if you haven't, the Cliff Notes version is this. Okay, if you have one of those cars that I don't make a harness for yet, all you have to do is cut the 8 speaker wires on your stock harness, solder these wires onto the source side, and solder these wires onto the sync or destination side, right? And then you rewrap it up with the OEM tape that's wrapped up on all these harnesses and all these Ferraris. Once you do that, I urge you to take these 2 Molex plugs on your mini harnesses, plug them into each other, then turn on your stereo, and once you see that the stereo works exactly like it did before, trust me, at that moment you're going to feel a lot better. Because all you have to do to hook up the aftermarket amp is unplug these connectors, and then plug a wire from here into the input side of the amp, plug another wire from the output side of the amp back into here, and now you have your aftermarket system. And if you ever sell the car, all you got to do is remove those harnesses, take these little Molex plugs, and plug them into each other, and now you're back to totally stock again. Okay, well, that's about it.